Hi, this is Cathy Ganatic. Today I'm going to be talking about the new moon in Scorpio that's happening on November 20th. It's one of the biggest lunations. That means new or full moons for the whole year. Has a lot of really powerful energy. It's really going to impact people who have planets or points at late degrees, like around, let's say, 25 to 30 degrees of the fixed signs. If you don't know what your rising sign is, there's a video below where you can find it, where I've described how to pull up astroseek.com. That can be really helpful. One of the other reasons this is such a powerful new moon is that the planet Uranus, the great liberator, the awakener, the planet of sudden events, is almost exactly opposite this new moon. And we have a kite configuration. So there's a lot to unpack. I hope you enjoy the video. Stick around for the end where I'm going to go through how this new moon might affect you depending on your rising sign. I'll go through all 12 of the signs. I hope you enjoy the video. If you do, like and subscribe. I'm trying to grow my channel right now, and it would be really helpful if you did. Let me pull up the whiteboard where whoops, that's a blank one. We don't want a blank one. So I just create these whiteboards so that you can get a visual of what I'm talking about that can really help us learn astrology. So we have a new moon in Scorpio. New moons represent this moment of initiation, the start of a new cycle. It can be a great time to set intentions and bring in fresh patterns in our lives. It's like planting that seed in the ground. The new moon always happens when the moon and the sun come together in the sky. The sun can represent consciousness or spirit or new ideas, and the moon is our embodied nature. So, like, it's this moment when we get to connect with spirit, and then that consciousness or that new understanding can unfold over the course of the month. Of course, there are larger lunar cycles we can look at as well. This new moon will be connected to a 27-month moon cycle or moon family that unfolds. And I'll give you a little information about that in a minute as well, so that you can maybe mark it on your calendar. I think it's August of 2027 is when this particular new moon in Scorpio is going to come to fruition in this larger 27-month cycle. So that can be an interesting way to track shifts in your life, is to maybe journal about what happens around this new moon and then read that journal again in August of 2027 and see what similar themes are popping up in your life or what may have come to fruition out of this new moon. We can then look at, what makes this such a powerful new moon. And I mentioned that Mercury is Cazimi. What does that mean? Well, Mercury is the god of communication. He was Hermes in the Greek pantheon, the messenger to the gods. And he goes retrograde like 3 times a year. And it's this moment we all know when maybe we have some missed appointments or snafus with our computer, everything goes awry. But really, these Mercury cycles or Mercury retrograde force some reflection. When things go awry, we begin to wonder why, or we have to correct. And it can be this way of realigning ourselves with our karma or the karmic cycles that are happening for us. And there's this moment in the middle of the Mercury retrograde cycle when the Mercury connects with the sun, and it's in the heart of the sun. That's what Cazimi means. And it's almost like you get this sudden insight or understanding about what the Mercury Cazimi or the Mercury retrograde cycle is for you. I'll give you one example. When I got pregnant with my first child, I've looked back at that chart because it happened on New Year's Eve, 1995 is when I found out I was pregnant. Looked at that chart, Mercury was Cazimi. So it's almost like, aha, the angels announcing something. So some announcement or some understanding can come to you. And so that in and of itself would make this a powerful new moon. But then we can add on the fact that we have a kite pattern in this new moon, and that is also quite powerful. So what's a kite pattern? You can see from the chart on the left that we have the new moon at the bottom, and then exactly opposite is Uranus. And then to the right and to the left, we have Saturn and Neptune in Pisces and Jupiter in Cancer. So First of all, there's a great water trine, right? Cancer, Scorpio, and Pisces are all the water signs. We have planets at very late degrees in all the water signs. So there's this lovely flowing energy between the new moon and Jupiter, which is in a great place in Cancer, offering support to the new moon, and Saturn and Neptune also in a trine to the new moon. A trine is this lovely flowing energy. So we get this sense of, wow, beautiful flowing energy around emotions. Water signs are all about emotions and imagination and connecting more deeply with ourselves, right? So we have that trine, but then opposite it, we have this tense energy of Uranus. And Uranus is at the apex of this kite. So if you think about the kite, the tail is where the new moon is. The apex, where all the energy is flowing, is at Uranus, this planet of sudden understanding, sudden events, sudden shakeups, liberation. And then those planets on the right and left are also pushing supportive sextile energy toward that Uranus. So it's like a kite taking off, right? We can think about how that might manifest for us individually if we know our rising sign. And again, I'll go through that at the end of the video, talking about, okay, what might it look like for you this particular new moon? So you can see it's powerful. And then I'm just going to slow down for a second and talk about the sign where the new moon is happening, because that adds another layer to the feeling of it, right? So we have the new moon in Scorpio. So there's going to be some seeding around the scorpionic energy, let's say. Scorpio is a water sign. All the water signs, as I mentioned already, are about emotion and intuition. They also have a sensitivity. Scorpio, in particular, is a very psychological, deep sign. It's like the deep water of the ocean floor. And it's a fixed energy. So people with Scorpio energy, there can be something about all the fixed signs where they have a stability, a loyalty, a persistence. They can be very determined and consistent, sometimes stubborn, let's say. And it's ruled by Mars, the god of war. If we put this all together, and I've said this before, a really great way to understand Scorpio is by comparing it to the sign Aries, which is also ruled by Mars. Aries is this fire sign. Fire signs are about inspiration and action. And Mars is kind of like that prize fighter who gets the knockout in the first round. He's one and done. It's this quick, sudden, assertive, yang masculine energy. Whereas Scorpio is like the prize fighter who goes 15 rounds, gets all bloodied up, sticks with it, and wins in the end. Scorpio's a little bit more because of that fixed energy. It's going to stay with the problem. And it's a little bit about survival. Sometimes there can be something about Scorpio folks where they're very protective. The image or the animal associated with Scorpio is the scorpion. If you think about scorpions, they have this outer shell and this capacity to pierce through, or pierce into their enemies. And that's a little bit of the energy of Scorpio. It has this psychological capacity to see into other people, to see through things that are not true, but it also grapples with questions of desire. Mars is the planet of kind of like what I want. And there's a lot of energy in Scorpio about personal relationships. It's got a personal quality of getting in there and getting intimate with another person, trying to get to know them. And so this is the base. This is where the new moon is falling. If you check out, I did a video a few days ago on Scorpio 3 where this particular new moon falls, the last 10 degrees, and it's associated with the Seven of Cups in tarot, a card that's associated with the seven deadly sins. And not to get too deep, but there's something about the energy of this new moon that might find us grappling with what it is to be human and our human desire. There's a little bit of a darkness toward the end of Scorpio, you're going to see. Now, I have Scorpio rising, so I say this lovingly, but, and also people with Scorpio um, energy in this last part of the sign It's like they're going through the ringer around what they want in life. They're challenging themselves to understand their desire, align with it, go for what they want, not get lost in the confusion of multiple imagined fantasies about what would be interesting, but to focus themselves and make a choice and step into life. And in stepping into life, running into the issue again of, well, what happens if my desire is not satisfied? How do I deal with the disappointment and loss of that? And that's a very humanizing process that can happen for people with planets or points in this part of the deck. And so I would say, as we talk a little bit later about your own rising sign and how it might impact you, that this new moon may get you connected with something you really want, and you may have a shakeup around that, where maybe you go for the thing that you want, and then there's a sudden event that takes it away or says maybe that you can't have it. And how do you deal with the letting go? Because that's really what Scorpio has to do. It wants to hold on. And part of the Scorpio lessons are about death and rebirth and letting go into the unknown. And so that might be what comes up for all of us with this new moon. If you want to geek out a little bit, as I was saying earlier, this new moon is not just about the 28-day cycle that's unfolding before us before the next new moon. It's also about a 27-month moon family cycle. And basically, you can look, and 18 months from now, we have the new moon in Scorpio now, but in 18 months, we're going to have the full moon in Scorpio. And that will be the moment when this moon family cycle, or a deeper understanding of the meaning of this new moon, really emerges as it unfolds in your life over that period of time. So you could mark your calendar for May 20th, 2027. Maybe check out the video I put up then and compare and think about and reflect. If you take some notes now at the new moon, on the intentions that you might set around the new moon, because this is a really great practice for us at the new moon, is you can take some notes so you can journal a little bit, set an intention about what you would like for the Scorpio part of your life. So if you're a Scorpio rising like me, that's your first house, your sense of who you are. I may, at this new moon, sit at my little altar, meditate, allow some information to come in, and think about what I want is around my own self development, how to deepen myself, how to connect with myself. And I may also think about how this new moon might impact my one on one relationships if something comes up suddenly, because Uranus will be in my seventh house of one on one relationships. Um, how am I going to deal with that? How would I like to deal with that? How would I like to, if it's a moment of release and letting go, which can happen sometimes with Uranus, um, how can I align myself with that? And so that's part of what we can do at a new moon. It's a time for reflection and setting intentions, grounding ourselves. So then let's move and talk a little bit more deeply now about how this new moon may play out for each of the different rising signs. And feel free to move forward in the video to get to your spot. But sometimes I've listened to a lot of other folks do this kind of practice, and sometimes listening to the first couple can help us ground us more deeply in the meaning. So, if you're an Aries rising, this is going to be your eighth house. And you'll see here on the left that I have a diagram of the basic meanings of the different eight houses in astrology. You see they're numbered from 1 to 12. And I'm just going to riff off of that now for each of the rising signs. So if you're an Aries rising, that means that Scorpio is in your eighth house. And that means that the new moon will be in the eighth house, which has to do with shared resources. It also is a sign that has to do with death, not just literal death, but what we can call ego death or karma. And so it can be about letting go. Um, when I say ego death, it's simply the idea that all of us take on these roles in our life and begin over the course of our lifetime to think, oh, that's who I am. So, for example, when you become a mom, um, like I did back when I found out I was pregnant and then I became a mom, you can really begin to think that's the essence of who you are. I am the mom and get overly identified with it. And then eventually, your kids leave home and your life changes and that mother role becomes less important to you, but we can hold on to those roles a little bit too tightly past the moment when they really serve us. And so part of growing up when you're an older person is when your kids leave home, letting go of some of or understanding it's a new moment in your life. And it might be a time to let go around your relationship with your kids and allow it to transition and change. So that's the idea of ego death. So for people with an Aries rising, you may be grappling with those questions. It could also simply be around resources because the eighth house also has to, since it's the second house from the seventh house of partnership, and second house has in our own chart has to do with our own resources. The eighth house has to do with resources in our partnership. So the new moon's happening in your eighth house of shared resources. Uranus, the planet of sudden liberation or sudden events, is in your second house of your own money. And all the energy is moving toward that Uranus in the second house if you're an Aries rising. So it may be sudden information around your resources or resources of a partner and adjusting to whatever that information is. Again, the energy feels like it's supportive toward that second house because all the energy is moving toward that in the kite. That's where Uranus is. So it may be something liberates you around how you make money in this moment or with this new moon. And you can think about that again. Again, maybe mark your calendar for May of 2027 and see how this story unfolds for you. Okay, Taurus, seventh house. So that the new moon in the seventh house may bring or not sudden information because Mercury's cazimi there around your relationships, your one-on-one partnerships. And the change may happen around who you are because Uranus, that planet of liberation or sudden events, is happening in your first house of self. So that's the axis. Something about this new moon, if you're a Taurus rising, is going to teach you about or give you information about who you are and who your partner is. So the sudden information is going to fall in the house that Uranus is in the house of who you are. It's going to be in your um uh sorry, that Uranus, yes, that Uranus is going to be in the house of who you are because the new moon is in the seventh house of partnership. Okay, so then if you're a Gemini rising, the new moon is happening in your sixth house and Uranus is in your 12th house. So this axis of the sixth and 12th can have to do with a lot of different topics, but basically the sixth house can have to do with health. It also has to do with any position where we find ourselves a little bit powerless. So it's kind of the house of the everyday worker. So the new moon might bring up stuff around your job, your I'm punching the clock kind of job, or around your health. Those are a couple of examples. And then Uranus is going to be in the 12th house, which can have a little bit to do with mental health because it's the house. Sometimes it's called the house of your own self undoing. It's the house of the unconscious, things coming up for you that were maybe you didn't know about, all of a sudden having some new understanding. And so this new moon could be a little bit more tense if it's falling in your sixth and 12th houses, because those are two difficult houses. So, and at the same time, while it may be a little bit more difficult, it's not going to be as impactful for you. So it won't be as powerful for a new moon for you if you're a Gemini rising, because Gemini is not a fixed sign. So the people that are really impacted by this new moon are Taurus and Leo and Scorpio and Aquarius. So yeah, especially if you have your rising degree or planets at the last degrees of those signs. So then let's move on to Cancer. If you're a Cancer rising, then this new moon falls in your fifth house with Uranus, the apex of the new moon, in your 11th house of friendships and groups. So, with the new moon in your fifth house, that's the house that has to do with children, our creativity, right? Because children are our creative product. A lot of times, people who have a lot of planets in the fifth house may work with children, or they may be people that are really creative in general, artists, writers, and so on. So, with the new moon in your fifth house and then the Uranus in your 11th house, could be some sudden information around something that's happening in a friend group. It could be something about your creative product as well. It's interesting. If the fifth house is our creativity, the 11th house is where we release that creativity out into the world. Sometimes when artists release a big album, they may have the nodes of the moon in the fifth and the 11th house, this releasing things out into the world. So you can think about that if you're a Cancer rising. And then if you're a Leo rising, this new moon is going to happen in your fourth house of home, family, ancestry with Uranus, that apex planet of the kite, where all the energy is moving into in the 10th house of career at the very top of your chart. So something about this new moon energy is going to ask you to balance or work with, or perhaps have sudden insights about the relationship of your home and your career. So there could be sudden shifts in those two areas of your life for you to work with. And then if you're a Virgo rising, the new moon is happening in your third house. The third house is the house of communication. It's the house of the goddess. It's where the moon has her joy. It can have to do with local travel. It also has to do with like grade school. It has to do with the things we learn through lived experience. If the moon has her joy there, the sun has his joy in the opposite house, the ninth house, which is the house that has to do with things that we learn intellectually, where we expand our consciousness. And so, this third house, ninth house dichotomy, where we're going to have the new moon in the third house of sort of what you do locally and your more personal vibes about gaining wisdom, the sudden information or the sudden change that Uranus is bringing, opposing that energy, is in the ninth house. So you could have sudden events around international travel. You decide to take a trip, or your ninth house can also have to do with philosophy and religion and anything that expands our mind, higher education. So it could also be if you're a student or somebody who wants to get another degree, you have a sudden eureka about how you might do that in your life. Of course, you can't get a really specific information about how the moon's going to affect you. You need to kind of know what's happening in your personal life around these third and ninth house topics so you can reflect on that a little bit. If you're a Libra rising, this new moon's going to happen in your second house of your resources. Now, we talked already. Now we're getting to the last six, and they're going to be sort of the flip side of the first six. So, Libra is the sign opposite Aries. So, for Libra, as with Aries, this new moon is going to bring up something about your resources and connection to resources with a partner, your sense of your own value, and your sense of how you work with other people. Eighth house can be about collaboration, how we connect with other people in a deep way. And so this is where the energy might be with a Libra rising. Uranus in your eighth house could be bring sudden events around, again, also can be inheritance, not just shared resources with a partner, or again, sudden understandings around what you might need to let go karmically in your life. Eighth house is pretty complicated. And then let's look at Scorpio first house, because Scorpio is where the new moon is happening. So the new moon's going to be in the first house or your rising sign. And for people with Scorpio first house, it's going to be the new moon's going to plant a seed around your sense of your own self development with a sudden event, potentially, or a sudden new understanding coming in the seventh house of one on one partnership. So the axis of myself and my partner is what's going to be triggered by this new moon, bringing a potential for some new understanding and growth. Then we can go to Sagittarius. The new moon is going to be happening in your 12th house with Uranus in your 6th house. New moon in the 12th house. 12th house, as I said earlier, and it can be the house of your own self undoing, but it's also this house of the collective unconscious, the things that we don't know, the things that maybe we've hidden away or haven't wanted to look at. And so with the new moon here, you could get a sudden insight about something that you need to grapple with that maybe you've hidden from psychologically in the past. And and again, it's interesting. There's a sudden insight quality to both the new moon because the Mercury Cazimi, that idea of aha, and because Uranus, the planet that's opposite, kind of has the vibe of Mercury Cazimi. It's about insights coming out of the blue or sudden events. And so, somebody with a Sagittarius 12th house, you could get some aha understanding of yourself, what you've been hiding from, and then also an event or a new understanding in your sixth house around powerlessness, health, your job, whatever. So, you can think about those two axes in your own chart if you're a Sagittarius rising. If you're a Capricorn rising, the new moon is going to be happening in your 11th house. That's the house of friends, organizations. I kind of call it the house of collective consciousness, the things that we know, our shared creativity with other people. And so the new moon in Scorpio there may bring a seed or some sort of insight around how you fit within your particular friend group or what you're doing if you're part of a volunteer organization, what's that about? And then it could also bring a sudden event or insight, Uranus, in your fifth house of creativity, something revolving around your kids or around if you have a big creative project that's going right now, you could get a sudden boost of understanding or inspiration that leads you to create something new out of this new moon. And then if you're an Aquarius rising, this new moon is happening in your 10th house of career. And for Aquarius risings, there might be a seed planted or some new understanding about what you do for career or how you if you're in a career that's really satisfying to you, maybe it's some new idea for how that might be expanded or a new understanding of your purpose in that area of your life as it relates to whatever happens in that fourth house where Uranus is going to be that sudden event or inspiration. So maybe something happens in your home life or around your ancestry, around your parents, that brings new ideas or brings something for you to deal with. And you can think about these axes, right? When something happens in our fourth house, a sudden event, Uranus, a change, like Uranus in the fourth can be literally, I'm moving home. It can affect the house opposite it because work and career, excuse me, home and career are kind of two ends. If we have more time for home, we have less time for career. If we have more time for career, sometimes we have less time for home. So it's that work-life balance that might be impacted for you if you're an Aquarius. Lastly, but not least, we have Pisces. And for Pisces, this new moon is going to happen in your ninth house. And we talked about ninth house having to do with, international travel and religion and philosophy and things like that, higher education. It's also the house of like how we understand the world, because that's kind of our philosophy of life. So people who have Scorpio in the ninth house, Pisces rising, This aha Mercury Cazimi is in the area of how you think about life, how you maybe it could also have to do with some sudden insight about what you want to do around higher education. Again, if you're somebody who's contemplating getting another degree or something like that, sometimes that can be a ninth house matter that might be planted, a seed might be planted around that right now. And then the event that may trigger some action is third house. That's where Uranus, the planet that's opposing the new moon and getting all the energy from the other planets, is going to be. And third house has to do with our local community, among other things. It also has to do with communication, siblings, things like that. So you can think about how those ideas or that axis of the third and ninth might be playing out in your life if you're a Pisces. Feel free to drop a line or drop a comment if you know your rising sign and you're thinking about these topics and want to share a little bit, or even in the future as this unfolds, if it ends up being a powerful new moon for you and you have a big event. I always like to see how the astrology unfolds in people's lives for them. So that was a lot. But I hope it was helpful. It's the first time I've gone through and done all or each of the rising signs. And yeah, give me some feedback if you liked it, or if you didn't, how I might improve. Because, I'm a Virgo. I've got a lot of Virgo energy. And I'm always hoping to improve what I offer because this really is something I do, not just because it gives me joy, but I also like to share what I can with other folks and help them use astrology as a tool for self-reflection and self-understanding. So I'll see you in a couple of weeks with the full moon. Have a great day.